Hello, welcome to today's reading of the Tenant of Wildfell Hall. Today will be chapters 10 and 11. Before we begin, I wanted to make two small points. The first one is I'm learning some new vocabulary words throughout the reading, and one of the ones that I noticed from last time in chapter 9, the word animadversions shows up 2 times. Animadversions means criticisms. So I'll read the 2 sentences in which the word appears. Markham and Mrs. Graham are having a chat after this tea party where rumors were starting to fly around, and Jane Wilson didn't want to sit beside Helen Graham because of her reputation. They're talking about it, and I'll just get a running start here. This is Helen talking. "Not all of them, surely," cried the lady, astonished at the bitterness of my remark. "No, certainly," now that's Markham talking, right? "I exonerate my sister from such degraded tastes, and my mother too, if you included her in your animadversions." And then Helen replies, "I meant no animadversions against anyone, and certainly intended no disrespectful allusions to your mother." The other comment that I wanted to make is it's funny, just the way people talked back then. Being snobby wasn't considered bad, it seems. I mean, I think it to an extreme it would be, but I'll just read on that very same page. There's an example of such talk. Let's have a listen. "Helen is weary to death of their small talk." So she's kind of speaking as though they're empty-headed people in the tea party. And maybe they're described as such, but she has no trouble saying this. So she says, "Nothing wears me out like that. I cannot imagine how they can go on as they do." And then she continues, "Is it that they think it their duty to be continually talking?" pursued she, "and so never pause to think, but fill up with aimless trifles and vain repetitions when subjects of real interest fail to present themselves? Or do they really take pleasure in such discourse?" So now Markham answers with his own version of it. "Very likely they do," said I. "Their shallow minds can hold no great ideas," Judgy, "and their light heads are carried away by trivialities that would not move a better furnished skull. And their only alternative to such discourse is to plunge over head and ears into the slough of scandal, which is their chief delight." So yeah, it's just interesting way which they talk, and that would be considered a way to describe these people, these poor flighty girls. Anyway, I thought that was interesting. Chapter 10, A Contract and a Quarrel. When all were gone, I learned that the vile slander had indeed been circulated throughout the company in the very presence of the victim. Rose, however, vowed she did not and would not believe it, and my mother made the same declaration, though not, I fear, with the same amount of real unwavering incredulity. It seemed to dwell continually on her mind, and she kept irritating me from time to time by such expressions as, "Dear, dear, who would have thought it? Well, I always thought there was something odd about her. You see what it is for women to affect to be different to other people." And once it was, "I misdoubted that appearance of mystery from the very first. I thought there would be no good come of it, and this is a sad, sad business, to be sure." "Why, mother, you said you don't believe these tales," said Fergus. "No more I do, my dear, but then, you know, there must be some foundation." "The foundation is in the wickedness and falsehood of the world," said I, "and in the fact that Mr. Lawrence has been seen to go that way once or twice of an evening, and the village gossips say he goes to pay his addresses to the strange lady, and the scandal mongers have greedily seized the rumor to make it the basis of their own infernal structure." "Well, but Gilbert, there must be something in her manner to countenance such reports." "Did you see anything in her manner?" "No, certainly. But then, you know, I always said there was something strange about her." I believe it was on that very evening that I ventured on another invasion of Wildfell Hall. For the time of our party, which was upwards of a week ago, I had been making daily efforts to meet its mistress in her walks, and always disappointed. She must have managed it so on purpose. Had nightly kept revolving in my mind some pretext or another for a call. At length I concluded that the separation could be endured no longer. By this time, you will see I was pretty far gone, and taking from the bookcase an old volume that I thought she might be interested in, though from its unsightly and somewhat dilapidated condition I had not yet ventured to offer it for her perusal, I hastened away, but not without sundry misgivings as to how she would receive me, or how I could summon courage to present myself with so slight an excuse. But perhaps I might see her in the field or the garden, and then there would be no great difficulty. It was the formal knocking at the door, with the prospect of being gravely ushered in by Rachel to the presence of a surprised, uncordial mistress, that so greatly disturbed me. My wish, however, was not gratified. Mrs. Graham herself was not to be seen, but there was Arthur playing with his frolicsome little dog in the garden. I looked over the gate and called him to me. He wanted me to come in, but I told him I could not without his mother's leave. "I'll go and ask her," said the child. "No, no, Arthur, you mustn't do that. But if she's not engaged, just ask her to come here a minute. Tell her I want to speak to her." He ran to perform my bidding and quickly returned with his mother. How lovely she looked, with her dark ringlets streaming in the summer breeze, her fair cheeks slightly flushed, and her countenance radiant with smiles. Dear Arthur, what did I not owe to you for this and every other happy meeting? Through him I was at once delivered from all formality, from terror and constraint. In love affairs there is no mediator like a merry, simple-hearted child, ever ready to cement divided hearts, to span the unfriendly gulf of custom, to melt the ice of cold reserve, and overthrow the separating walls of dread formality and pride. "Well, Mr. Markham, what is it?" said the young mother, accosting me with a pleasant smile. "I want you to look at this book, if you please, to take it and peruse it at your leisure. I make no apology for calling you on such a lovely evening, though it be for a matter of no greater importance." "Tell him to come in, mamma," said Arthur. "Would you like to come in?" asked the lady. "Yes, I should like to see your improvements in the garden, and how your sister's roots have prospered in my charge," added she, as she opened the gate. As we sauntered through the garden and talked of the flowers and trees and the book, and then of other things, the evening was kind and genial, and so was my companion. By degrees I waxed more warm and tender than perhaps I had ever been before, but still I said nothing tangible, and she attempted no repulse, until, in passing a moss rose tree that I had brought her some weeks since in my sister's name, she plucked a beautiful half-open bud and bade me give it to Rose. "May I not keep it myself?" I asked. "No, but here is another for you." Instead of taking it quietly, I likewise took the hand that offered it and looked into her face. She let me hold it for a moment, and I saw a flash of ecstatic brilliance in her eye, a flow of glad excitement on her face. I thought my hour of victory was come, but instantly a painful recollection seemed to flash upon her. A cloud of anguish darkened her brow. A marble paleness blanched her cheek and lip. There seemed a moment of inward conflict, and with a sudden effort she withdrew her hand and retreated a step or two back. "Now, Mr. Markham," said she, with a kind of desperate calmness, "I must tell you plainly that I cannot do with this. I like your company because I am alone here, and your conversation pleases me more than that of any other person. But if you cannot be content to regard me as a friend, a plain, cold, motherly, or sisterly friend, I must beg you to leave me now and let me alone hereafter. In fact, we must be strangers for the future." "I will then be your friend or brother or anything you wish, if you will only let me continue to see you. But tell me why I cannot be anything more." There was a perplexed and thoughtful pause. "Is it in consequence of some rash vow?" "It is something of the kind," she answered. "Some day I may tell you, but at present You had better leave me, and never, Gilbert, put me to the painful necessity of repeating what I have just now said to you," she earnestly added, giving me her hand in serious kindness. How sweet, how musical my own name sounded in her mouth! "I will not," I replied, "but you pardon this offense? On condition that you never repeat it. And may I come to see you now and then? Perhaps, occasionally, provided you never abuse the privilege. I make no empty promises, but you shall see. The moment you do, our intimacy is at an end, that's all. And will you always call me Gilbert? It sounds more sisterly, and it will serve to remind me of our contract." She smiled, and once more bid me to go, and at length I judged it prudent to obey, and she re-entered the house, and I went down the hill. But as I went, the tramp of horses' hoofs fell on my ear, and broke the stillness of the dewy evening, and, looking towards the lane, I saw a solitary equestrian coming up. Inclined to dusk as it was, I knew him at a glance. It was Mr. Lawrence on his grey pony. I flew across the field, leaped the stone fence, and then walked down the lane to meet him. On seeing me, he suddenly drew in his little steed and seemed inclined to turn back, but on second thought apparently judged it better to continue his course as before. He accosted me with a slight bow, and edging close to the wall, endeavored to pass on, but I was not so minded. Seizing his horse by the bridle, I exclaimed, "Now, Lawrence, I will have this mystery explained. Tell me, where are you going, and what do you mean to do, at once and distinctly?" "Will you take your hand off the bridle?" said he quietly. "You're hurting my pony's mouth." "You and your pony bee! What makes you so coarse and brutal, Markham? I'm quite ashamed of you." "You answer my questions before you leave this spot. I will know what you mean by this perfidious duplicity." "I shall answer no questions till you let go of the bridle, if you stand till morning." "Now then," said I, unclosing my hand, but still standing before him. "Ask me some other time when you can speak like a gentleman," returned he, and made an effort to pass me again, but I quickly recaptured the pony, scarce less astonished than its master at such uncivil usage. "Really, Mr. Markham, this is too much," said the latter. "Can I not go and see my tenant on matters of business without being assaulted in this manner by—" "This is no time for business, sir. I'll tell you now what I think of your conduct." "You'd better defer your opinion to a more convenient season," interrupted he in a low tone. "Here's the vicar." And in truth the vicar was just behind me, plodding homeward from some remote corner of his parish. I immediately released the squire, and he went on his way, saluting Mr. Millward as he passed. "What, quarrelling, Markham?" cried the latter, addressing himself to me. "And about the young widow, I don't doubt," he added, reproachfully shaking his head. "But let me tell you, young man," here he put his face into mine with an important, confidential air, "she's not worth it." And he confirmed the assertion by a solemn nod. "Mr. Millward!" I exclaimed, in a tone of wrathful menace that made the reverend gentleman look round aghast, astonished at such unwonted insolence, and stare me in the face with a look that plainly said, "What, this to me?" But I was too indignant to apologize, or to speak another word to him. I turned away, and hastened homewards, descending with rapid strides the steep, rough lane, and leaving him to follow as he pleased. Chapter 11. The Vicar again. You must suppose about 3 weeks passed over. Mrs. Graham and I were now established friends, or brother and sister, as we rather chose to consider ourselves. She called me Gilbert by my express desire, and I called her Helen, for I had seen that name written in her books. I seldom attempted to see her above twice a week, and still I made our meetings appear the result of accident as often as I could, for I found it necessary to be extremely careful. And altogether I behaved with such exceeding propriety that she never had occasion to reprove me once. Yet I could not but perceive that she was at times unhappy and dissatisfied with herself or her position, and truly I myself was not quite contented with the latter. This assumption of brotherly nonchalance was very hard to sustain, and I often felt myself a most confounded hypocrite with it all. I saw too, or rather I felt, that in spite of herself, I was not indifferent to her, as the novel heroes modestly express it, and while I thankfully enjoyed my present good fortune, I could not fail to wish and hope for something better in future. But of course, I kept such dreams entirely to myself. "Where are you going, Gilbert?" said Rose one evening shortly after tea, when I had been busy with the farm all day. "To take a walk," was the reply. "Do you always brush your hat so carefully and do your hair so nicely and put on such smart new gloves when you take a walk?" "Not always." "You're going to Wildfell Hall, aren't you?" "What makes you think so?" "Because you look as if you were, but I wish you wouldn't go so often." "Nonsense, child. I don't go once in 6 weeks." "What do you mean?" "Well, but if I were you, I wouldn't have so much to do with Mrs. Graham." "Why, Rose, are you too giving in to the prevailing opinion?" "No," returned she hesitatingly, "but I've heard so much about her lately, both at the Wilsons and the vicarage, and besides, mamma says if she were a proper person, she would not be living there by herself. And don't you remember last winter, Gilbert, all of that about those false names to the picture? How she explained it, saying she had friends or acquaintances from whom she wished her present residence to be concealed, and that she was afraid of their tracing her out, and then how suddenly she started up and left the room when that person came, whom she took good care not to let us catch a glimpse of, and who Arthur, with such an air of mystery, told us was his mamma's friend." "Yes, Rose, I remember it all, and I can forgive your uncharitable conclusions, for perhaps if I did not know her myself, I should put all these things together and believe the same as you do. But thank God, I do know her, and I should be unworthy the name of a man if I could believe anything that was said against her, unless I heard it from her own lips. I should as soon believe such things of you, Rose." "Oh, Gilbert!" "Well, do you think I could believe anything of the kind, whatever the Wilsons and Millwards dared to whisper?" "I should hope not, indeed." "And why not?" "Because I know you well, and I know her just as well." "Oh, no, you know nothing of her former life, and last year at this time you did not know that such a person existed." "No matter. There is such a thing as looking through a person's eyes into the heart and learning more of the height and breadth and depth of another's soul in 1 hour than it might take you a lifetime to discover, if he or she were not disposed to reveal it, or if you had not the sense to understand it." "Then you are going to see her this evening?" "To be sure I am." "But what would mamma say, Gilbert?" "Mamma needn't know." "But she must know sometime if you go on." "Go on? There's no going on in the matter. Mrs. Graham and I are two friends, and will be, and no man breathing shall hinder it, or has a right to interfere between us. But if you knew how they talk, you would be more careful, for her sake as well as for your own. Jane Wilson thinks your visits to the old hall but another proof of her depravity." "Confound Jane Wilson! And Eliza Millward is quite grieved about you." "I hope she is. But I wouldn't tell if I were you." "Wouldn't what? How do they know that I go there?" "There's nothing hid from them. They spy out everything." "Oh, I never thought of this. And so they dare to turn my friendship into food for further scandal against her? That proves the falsehood of their other lies, at all events, if any proof were wanting. Mind you contradict them, Rose, whenever you can." "But they don't speak openly to me about such things. It is only by hints and innuendos, and by what I hear others say, that I know what they think." "Well, then, I won't go today, as it is getting latish. But, oh, deuce, their cursed envenomed tongues," I muttered in the bitterness of my soul. And just at that moment, the vicar entered into the room. We had been too much absorbed in our conversation to observe his knock. After the customary cheerful and fatherly greeting of Rose, who was rather a favorite with the old gentleman, he turned somewhat sternly to me. "Well, sir," said he, You're quite a stranger. It is, let me see, he continued slowly as he deposited his ponderous bulk in the armchair that Rose officiously brought towards him. It is just 6 weeks by my reckoning since you darkened my door. He spoke it with emphasis and struck his stick on the floor. It is, sir, said I. Ay, it is so. He added an affirmatory nod and continued to gaze upon me with a kind of irate solemnity, holding his substantial stick between his knees with his hands clasped upon its head. I have been busy, I said, for an apology was evidently demanded. Busy, repeated he derisively. Yes, I've been getting in my hay, and now the harvest is beginning. Humph! Just then my mother came in and created a diversion in my favor by her loquacious and animated welcome of the reverend guest. She regretted deeply that he had not come a little earlier in time for tea, but offered to have some immediately prepared if he would do her the favor to partake of it. Not any for me, I thank you, replied he. I shall be at home in a few minutes. Oh, but do stay and take a little. It will be ready in 5 minutes. But he rejected the offer with a majestic wave of the hand. I'll tell you what I'll take, Mrs. Markham, said he. I'll take a glass of your excellent ale. With pleasure, cried my mother, proceeding with alacrity to pull the bell and order the favored beverage. I thought, continued he, I'd just look in upon you as I passed and taste your home-brewed ale. I've been to call on Mrs. Graham. Have you indeed? He nodded gravely and added with awful emphasis, I thought it incumbent upon me to do so. Really? Ejaculated my mother. Why so, Mr. Millward? Asked I. He looked at me with some severity, and turning again to my mother, repeated, I thought it incumbent upon me, and struck his stick on the floor again. My mother sat opposite, an awestruck but admiring auditor. Mrs. Graham, said I. He continued shaking his head as he spoke. These are terrible reports. What, sir? Says she, affecting to be ignorant of my meaning. It is my duty as your pastor, said I, to tell you both everything that I myself see reprehensible in your conduct, and all I have reason to suspect, and what others tell me concerning you. So I told her. You did, sir, cried I, starting from my seat and striking my fist on the table. He merely glanced toward me and continued addressing his hostess. It was a painful duty, Mrs. Markham, but I told her. And how did she take it? Asked my mother. Hardened, I fear. Hardened, he replied, with a despondent shake of the head. And at the same time there was a strong display of unchastened, misdirected passions. She turned white in the face and drew her breath through her teeth in a savage sort of way. But she offered no extenuation or defense, and with a kind of shameless calmness, shocking indeed to witness in one so young, as good as told me that my remonstrance was unavailing, and my pastoral advice quite thrown away upon her, nay, that my very presence was displeasing while I spoke such things, and I withdrew at length, too plainly seeing that nothing could be done, and sadly grieved to find her case so hopeless. But I am fully determined, Mrs. Markham, that my daughters shall not consort with her. Do you adopt the same resolution with regard to yours? As for your sons, as for you, young man, he continued, sternly turning to me. As for me, sir, I began, but checked by some impediment in my utterance, and finding that my whole frame trembled with fury, I said no more, but took the wiser part of snatching up my hat and bolting from the room, slamming the door behind me with a bang that shook the house to its foundations, and made my mother scream, and gave a momentary relief to my excited feelings. The next minute saw me hurrying with rapid strides in the direction of Wildfell Hall. To what intent or purpose I could scarcely tell, but I must be moving somewhere, and no other goal would do. I must see her, too, and speak to her, that was certain. But what to say or how to act, I had no definite idea. Such stormy thoughts, so many different resolutions crowded in upon me that my mind was little better than a chaos of conflicting passions. End of chapter 11.